Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks, and today we are here with one more 2022 wrap-up video. We're going to be ranking all of my book of the month selections from 2022. That is quite a lot of books because I did order 3 books per month for the full 12 months. So we're going to get right into it. I'm just going to give you a title and an author. I'm not even gonna really go into a description of each book. As I get towards the top, I might explain a little bit why I rated books as high as I did, but I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on each one just because I don't want this to be a 5-hour saga of book of the month picks. It was actually quite hard to sort out the really bad books and the really good books because so many of them were of excellent quality. And I'm usually not disappointed. If I get 3 books in a month, I generally am gonna like at least 2 of them, and sometimes I'll pick one that's I know is gonna be kind of experimental for me. So as I mentioned, I purchased a total of 36 books from Book of the Month last year. And I have 1 extra book. Because I have BFF status on Book of the Month, I did receive 1 extra book at the end of the year when they did their Book of the Year awards. I got to pick one of the finalists for myself, and so I actually ended up with 37 books from Book of the Month last year. So first, before we get into my ranking of them, we're gonna just go through the ones that are unread at this point, because I have a handful that I still have not finished, mostly the ones that I picked up at the end of the year. So my unread books are The Wilderness of Stars by Shea Earnshaw, The Light Pirate by Lily Brooks Dalton, The Circus Train by Amita Parika, Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercourt, As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katua, Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen, Mercury Pictures Presents by Anthony Mara, Small Angels by Laura Owens, and my book of the year selection, The Lincoln Highway by Immortals. So those are all the books that I have selected that I have not completed yet. I am working my way through them, and I should have actually all of those read fairly soon, within the next couple months, but obviously I can't rate them because I haven't completed them yet. So now let's get into my ranking. I'm gonna start with my lowest rated book, and I'm gonna work my way all the way to my favorite one. My least favorite book of the month selection from 2022 was Breathless by Amy McCullough. I'm not gonna go into great detail. I'm just gonna say that while I loved the setting, I didn't like a lot of the details. I found the character to be uninspiring, kind of weak, and to be put into a position that she really shouldn't have been in if she was gonna be going on a high altitude expedition. I do have more detail on that in my least favorite books of 2022, so if you'd like a little more description, feel free to look up here. Number 27 was Book of Night by Holly Black. While I thought the concept of this one was cool, I did find it a little bit slow and not nearly as exciting as I was expecting. It could just be because it's setting up the rest of the series, so I'll reserve judgment until I see book 2. Book 26 was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I wanted to love this. I really like thrillers. Unfortunately, I think Lucy Foley is just not my writer. I find that she is too heavy-handed with her red herrings, and her books get too twisty and all over the place, and to the point that I have a hard time taking them seriously. 25 was Firstborn by Will Dean. This was a thriller about twins. I wanted to love this one as well. Same kind of thing, it just got a little overly twisty, and I found it to be kind of slow and not so suspenseful, even though it is a thriller. It wasn't a horrible book, but it also wasn't a memorable book. 24 was Youre Invited by Amanda J. Atissa. This one was super disappointing. I loved My Sweet Girl. It was one of my favorite thrillers of 2021, so I of course picked up Youre Invited hoping it would be just as excellent. Unfortunately, I found it kind of lackluster, very vanilla, not super exciting. 23 was The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis. This was also a story that I felt like went off the rails at a certain point. It was interesting up to a certain bit, and then the story just kind of goes all over the place. It's, kind of unbelievable. And again, I get that it's fiction, so it doesn't have to be super believable, but when you're writing historical fiction, I think one of the things is making it believable. So I don't know, and I didn't find it all that interesting. I really kind of had to push myself through the second half of the book. 22 is Siren Queen by Nevo, and I also wanted to really love this one. I love magical realism. I thought that the concept of this being about old Hollywood and an Asian American actress trying to make her break and everything sounded really interesting. Unfortunately, I got a really vague magical structure, confusing story. While the writing was very lyrical and beautiful, half the time I didn't know what was going on. So this could be one of those books that's just way above my head. I might not be smart enough for it, but it ultimately didn't work for me. Number 21 is Someday Maybe by Onyi Nwabineli. I'm gonna actually be reviewing this in great detail on Friday. So if you are looking for a more in-depth discussion of this, definitely check it out tomorrow. But I will say I liked this one. It was a deep and dark and depressing read, but I think that's what the book was supposed to be. and I thought the writing was really beautiful in this. I think it was solid. Number 20 is The Fortunes of Jaded Women by Carolyn Wynne. This was a book that I actually quite enjoyed. I thought it was interesting to see the different generations of the family, this curse of sorts with love. I thought it was an interesting story, not the most original story I've ever read, nor the most like standout story in my mind, but a solid entry, something I enjoyed, something I'd be comfortable recommending reading. Number 19 was The Devil Takes You Home by Gabino Iglesias. If you want a full in-depth review of this, I have a video up here that you can check out, but suffice it to say, I was super excited. This is a barrio noir. I loved so much of this book, the setting, the suspense thriller vibe. The only reason that I didn't rate this book a little bit higher was just because I found it very predictable. From like the halfway point all the way to the ending, I was pretty much able to pick out the major plot points prior to them happening. Number 18 was The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. This was an enjoyable read. Again, one of those books where I was happy with it. I would feel comfortable recommending it. It doesn't stand out like crazy high in my mind, but it also wasn't like standing out for being bad either. Just a solid, interesting entry. Number 17 was Darling Girl by Liz Mikulski. This was a Peter Pan retelling, and boy did it get gritty and dark. I really enjoyed this one. I think that, you know, there's a lot of retellings, and obviously Peter Pan has been redone multiple times over, but I thought that, you know, this author put their own unique twist on it. While it's not the most original content ever, I did find it an enjoyable read if you like dark and gritty. Number 16 was The Cartographers by Peng Shepherd. This is kind of an interesting fantasy, magical vibe centered around maps, which was really interesting for me. I don't know much about cartography, and so it was a little bit of learning, and, you know, same kind of thing, not the most standout book in my mind, but also just solid, happy with it, glad I read it. Number 15 was In Every Mirror She's Black by Lola Akinmade Ackerstrom. This was a really interesting read for me. It's about race and perception, and it takes place in Sweden. So often, you know, books that deal with race, I feel like are centered in America or in the UK. So it's kind of interesting for me to see this book take place in Sweden and, you know, the dynamics of race and how it affects people there. Number 14 was Kaikei by Vaishnavi Patel. This was a fun book. It is a retelling of the Ramayana, and it is about some very famous characters in Indian culture. I really enjoyed this book. I thought the retelling was really solid. I thought it portrayed our main character's struggles, and it kind of gave her character some depth that she doesn't necessarily have in the original story. Would definitely recommend it if you're into mythology and retelling. Number 13 was The Death of Evac OG by Aqua Eke Emeze. This was a sucker punch to the gut. It is a very moving story. It's really, really short. I think it might be actually the shortest book on the list, written in a very unique style, and it makes you uncomfortable in certain spots, but like purposefully so. That discomfort makes you examine your own perceptions based on your culture and the way that you were raised. And I really appreciated that about the book. Aqua Eke Emeze, I feel like you can't go wrong with their writing at all. Number 12 was The Many Daughters of Afang by Jamie Ford. I recently read that, and I'm actually going to be posting a video very soon, like within the next couple weeks, where I do a recipe and a review based on this book. So I'll be talking about it in more detail there. So if you're interested, stay tuned in the next couple weeks to see that. This book is about generational trauma and how basically like trauma that happened 6 or 7 generations back trickles through until, you know, modern day basically. And I thought this was super, super interesting. I thought that the book touched on this subject in a way that like helps you understand like current research on it, not just this fictional version of it. And it's a depressing book. It's, you know, not an easy read either, but I thought that it was just really interesting the way that this explored so many generations and all the things each person had been through. Number 11 is Pachinko by Minjin Lee. Who hasn't read this book and said that they loved it? I feel like everybody has been reviewing it super positively, and that's for good reason. It's an excellent book. It is set in Korea during the Japanese occupation, and it follows characters as that they have to make some really difficult life decisions. Beautifully written, very moving, excellent book. Number 10 was Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. Finally, a thriller that lived up to the hype for me. This book, holy shit. The twist in this book is dark and horrible, but also one that caught me off guard a little bit. Like, I'm terrible for predicting the endings to thrillers. Like, I simultaneously love thrillers and also am typically able to spoil them myself without much effort. So this was nice, reading a book that was genuinely suspenseful, genuinely was hard for me to spoil for myself, kept kept me on the edge of my seat. Number 9 was Upgrade by Blake Crouch. So I had never read a Blake Crouch book prior to Upgrade, and I saw it as an option, and I've kind of been re-dipping my toes back into sci-fi. It's a genre that I chronically forget that I really enjoy. So I'll go like months without reading a sci-fi book, and then I pick one up and I'm like, why haven't I been reading more sci-fi? So that's what happened with Upgrade. I picked it up, I read it, I literally devoured it, and then I picked up every single Blake Crouch book that I could find. In fact, you can see Recursion sitting right behind me. I have Dark Matter on this shelf over here somewhere. So that started a big sci-fi binge for me last year because Upgrade was so enjoyable and it just reminded me why I love sci-fi. So this definitely deserves a place in the top 10. Number 8 was A History of Wild Places by Shea Earnshaw. This is a mystery about a compound out in the woods where people are living, and there's a lot of magical realism elements. You know, we're wondering what happened to several different characters, how people ended up in this compound. It is a really interesting book. I found a couple people said that it was predictable, and I actually did find it somewhat predictable, but I thought the writing was so beautiful and the magical realism element was so interesting that even though I was able to predict some of what was going to happen, I still was really engaged in the book. Number 7 was White Horse by Erica T. Worth. I just reviewed this in great detail, so if you'd like to check that out, here's the link. But suffice it to say, I enjoyed this. This is a horror. I loved the inclusion of Native culture within this horror story. I thought that the character was really interesting. And if you want just a good spooky book, this is a good one to get into. Number 6 was The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. This is the first book in what I believe is going to be a series. It's set in the Middle East, and it is about a girl and jinns and genies and all of this stuff. I loved it. It was so good. I started reading it and I devoured it like within 36 hours. I could not put it down. And I am dying for the next book in the series to come out. Number 5 is The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. I also have a recipe and a review of this book coming out on Saturday. So if you're interested in more detail in this book, please look for that video coming out in the next couple days. But I love this because of its really creepy gothic vibes. I love the main character. She's feisty. She breaks the stereotype of what she's supposed to be as a hacendado. I really loved the post-revolution setting in Mexico. I thought that part was really interesting. I loved the way that it portrayed issues like classism, sexism, misogyny, the church, and the church going after people that didn't have the same beliefs as them. It covered a lot of really interesting topics. Number 4 was Sankofa by Chibundo Onuzo. This is such an interesting book. It's about a woman who grows up in London and never really knows her father, and then eventually she finds out her father is the dictator of a small African country. She travels back to finally meet him, and what she finds is something that's hard for her to grasp. There's humanity, but there's also awful stuff. And she kind of has to create her own relationship with this man. This book was a super interesting exploration of our morality, of our views of different people, different actions, you know, all sorts of different stuff. And it was just so unique. I had never read anything with this concept before. I loved it. It was a short book, but a really good book. I think it's worth reading for sure. Number 3 was Don't Cry for Me by Dr. Daniel Black. It is about a father reflecting on his relationship with his son. So his son is gay and he's very homophobic, and he's writing this letter trying to explain, you know, the choices that he made and where he came from. And it's not really an excuse. He's not trying to excuse his terrible behavior and his bad choices. He's just trying to give his son context for why he was the way he was. Such a profound, moving book. Definitely one of those books that might inspire a few tears. Number 2 on my list is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is probably the lightest book that showed up on this entire list, and it was a shocker for me because I'm not a big romance reader. I happened to pick this up last year during my romance month because I had been hearing a lot of hype about it. I didn't expect to love it. I went into it kind of expecting to just be like, meh, 3-star read, because that's how I typically feel about romances. And I freaking loved this book. It was so good, so cute, it's clever, there's just witty banter. I love the politics that are set up in it. I love like the world that's imagined in it. I loved both characters. I really didn't have anything negative to say, and it's so rare that I read something that's just like a overall happy, funny book and just enjoy it as thoroughly as I enjoyed this one. So because of that, I had to rate this up in the top here. And my number 1 book of the month selection for 2023 was Behold the Dreamers by Mbolo Mbue. So I've read 2 books now by Mbolo Mbue, and both of them are stunners. But Behold the Dreamers is particularly stunning and incredibly relevant. It's about a family of people from Cameroon who immigrate here to the United States. They're living in New York City, and it focuses mostly on the father and what he's trying to do to support his family and survive in the city. He goes to extraordinary lengths to try to make the American dream work, and it's heartbreaking, it's moving, it's infuriating, it's a whole lot of things. And as somebody who grew up on the border and who has had experience with immigration, deportation, things like that, partners, family members and stuff, having seen how the immigration system works, it makes this book all the more, I don't know, heartbreaking, frustrating, because it articulates so many of the things that are happening in the country right now. And I just thought it was so sharp and on point with it. The writing is beautiful. You really fall in love with these characters and come to care for them. So I'm so glad that I picked up this book. Definitely an excellent read, and happy to name it number 1 on my list of Book of the Month books for 2022. That's the end of my video. You've heard about every single book that I got in the year of 2022 from Book of the Month. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and comment down below. Let me know what your favorite Book of the Month pick was for 2022. Or if you're not subscribed to Book of the Month, just let me know what your favorite book for 2022 was. And if you're not already subscribed, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way we never miss each other. And other than that, I hope you have a great night. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.